I need to move the microphone up after all the other speakers. So comments on my height a little bit earlier. I do want to clarify, actually, I'm not a basketball player. I'm actually a netball player. So, firstly, can I thank firstly Sir David Garrard and Ava for inviting me here to speak today, and also to the International Institute for inviting me to speak on behalf of counter-terrorism policing in the United Kingdom. It is an absolute privilege to be here representing the Commissioner, Cressida Dick, and discussing such a globally important topic. I'm also delighted to be here in Israel. I spent a very large part of my career working in the Golders Green area of London, so I have a very close relationship with the Jewish community there and worked with them through some very difficult times. I have a national responsibility in the UK leading on protective security, which ensures that we are working effectively across the country to protect our crowded places, our critical national infrastructure, royalty and government ministers, and iconic locations such as our palaces and our castles. Like all aspects of counter-terrorism policing, we coordinate nationally, but we deliver locally through 43 separate regional forces, which does seem a lot of police forces until you go to America. It is a unique and successful collaboration within our policing structure, and one which has sadly been tested far too often in recent times. 12 months ago, former Assistant Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley explained to this conference how we were responding to 4 terrorist attacks in London and Manchester. Attacks that killed 36 people and left hundreds more injured. Shortly afterwards, we were to experience a further attack on his return. An improvised explosive device activated on a train that had pulled into a tube station near the centre of London. The train was full of commuters and school children, and thankfully the device failed to fully detonate and no more lives were lost. But 23 people were injured by the blast and 28 more hurt in the rush to get away from the scene. The teenager responsible, as we have seen recently, Ahmed Hassan, is now serving a life sentence. Just a few weeks ago, there was another incident in Westminster. This one involved, as you will have seen in the global news coverage, a vehicle that collided with pedestrians and a cyclist. Thankfully, no one was killed, although 3 people were injured. The case is ongoing and so difficult to talk about at the present, but we are treating this as having a terrorism connection. In all of these attacks, what we absolutely know is that victims' injuries, both physical and psychological, have an impact that is lived with for a lifetime. So what have we in the UK counter-terrorism policing learnt during the past 18 months, and what has changed as a result of those attacks? We have learnt that the events in London and Manchester and the scale of the policing operations that accompanied them were not a temporary escalation of threat. Rather, these events confirmed a sustained shift in the threat. The attacks demonstrated that the breadth of targets and methodologies employed has broadened. The weapons used by the attackers now range from sophisticated explosives to a family car or an everyday kitchen knife. This simplification of methodology, encouraged by terrorist groups in their slick and accessible online propaganda, is widening the pool from which would-be attackers can be recruited and radicalised. Of course, using a knife or vehicle as a potential weapon for mass murder is not a methodology unique to the UK, but for us in the UK, it is relatively new. To put this escalation in the threat into context, to put it into numbers, during the 5 years prior to the Westminster attack in March 2017, UK police and intelligence services disrupted 13 attack plots and 3 were carried out. In the past 18 months, there have been 17 disrupted plots, as well as the 5 attacks that actually took place in 2017, and of course the recent ongoing incident from Westminster. In other words, 22 foiled or successful attacks in 18 months, as opposed to a previous average of 3 a year. Recent forward plots include plans to attack police officers, plans to radicalise and utilise school children to carry out an attack, and a plot to murder our Prime Minister. Of the 17 disruptions I referred to, 13 were Islamist related and 4 connected to the extreme right wing in the UK. For CT investigations as a whole, we have seen a record number of arrests, with 441 being recorded in the last year, and we have charged and prosecuted more people than ever for terrorism-related offences. These prosecutions and inquests have contributed significantly to our workload. We continue to manage the threat from Syria returnees, which we've heard a lot of today. We estimate around half of 900 individuals who left the UK to take part in the conflict have returned back to the UK. Many will have been trained in combat, and we know that they will be battle-hardened. We, along with other law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies, have a plan to manage all of those considered to be a threat to our country and to our allies. And we are grateful to international partners for their continued assistance in this area. Developments domestically mean we are also devoting considerable resources to the rise of the extreme right wing, which was the motivating ideology behind one of the attacks last year and a motivating factor in the murder of one of our members of parliament in 2016. This neo-Nazi ideology, which is also exploiting the digital space, has the capacity to poison young minds and undermine community cohesion, every bit as much as that driven by international influences. Most recently, we have moved into less familiar, although not entirely new territory for counter-terrorism policing, investigating a nerve agent attack in Wiltshire, a small town in the south of London that killed one person and left others severely ill. The investigation and the decontamination of the key sites has had a massive impact on the local economy and community, where many businesses are heavily reliant on tourism. I say not entirely new because 11 years ago, Alexander Litvinenko, a Russian who had been granted British citizenship, was killed in London, having been poisoned by polonium-210. So as you can imagine, our work around hostile state actors continues. On a day-to-day level, we have around 650 live investigations involving some 3,000 people posing serious threats, and we have 20,000 others of some concern. People who have only been on the edge of investigations, but nevertheless have the potential to escalate their involvement. This is the reality of the threat that we are facing, and we expect this to last for some time. So what are we doing to keep pace with this unprecedented threat? The British Police Service prides itself on being a learning organisation, hungry to innovate and improve. The 5 attacks of 2017 swiftly and significantly led to changes in the way that we operate in many areas. Detailed reviews were conducted by ourselves and our primary partner, MI5. Our assessment on what action was required was then independently scrutinised by David Anderson, an eminent lawyer and former government reviewer of terrorism legislation. His report was made public in December, and he concluded that the strong and close relationship between the two services had allowed us to look closely at our systems and processes, question them, and then press each other for changes where necessary. There were over 100 recommendations for change, from adding domestic extremism to the remit of MI5 to improving data analytics to help spot behavioural changes in former subjects of interest. But arguably, given the traditional culture of counter-terrorism, the most radical change is that we have committed to a wider sharing of intelligence with local policing and public authorities. These have not traditionally been part of the intelligence sharing circle, but the reality is they are closest to their communities. This change will alert them to specific threats and give them more opportunities to address them. We've got pilots to develop this new way of working, which have recently been established in both London, Manchester and Birmingham. It is absolutely critical that when it comes to our work with communities and with local statutory and non-statutory partners, that we must dare to share. This work to help us manage risks more effectively builds on enhancements that we had already made following the attacks in Europe of 2015, including the horrific events in Tunisia that resulted in the death of 30 British holidaymakers. This earlier work saw a significant investment by the UK government in to uplift the number of armed response officers, although UK policing still only arms 7% of its police officers. And it also, I think what we'll all agree, that we've seen the benefit of increasing that with the rapid response to the attacks last year. We also had increased and improved our surveillance capability, digital exploitation, and we had lobbied government so that legislation keeps pace with the changing world and terrorist use of online communication. In particular, in tackling the online threat, our Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit, which is unique in world policing, has worked to remove over 300,000 pieces of terrorist content from the internet since its launch in 2010. An exciting area of change for us is our external work with the private sector. We recognised that there needed to be a step change in the way we work externally with commercial industries to strengthen physical protective security measures and empower workers in crowded places to play their role in assisting police. The police and government only provide bespoke protection for a small number of critical national infrastructure sites, crowded places and iconic locations, and that is based on analysis of threat and risk. With the move towards low sophistication methodologies, any crowded place is now a potential target. At shopping centres, sports stadia and entertainment venues, the simple fact is that conservatively 90% of security is provided by the private sector. Therefore, we need close collaboration, striving for common operating standards and training programmes, and ensuring security is at the heart of business planning. We have local committees for licensing and planning, which should also ensure that security is considered at the outset when companies are making applications to trade or construct new buildings. Protect by Design should, in my view, be a global brand for all new buildings. It's hard to talk of any positives that can come from a series of terrorist attacks that leaves 36 people dead. But after the Manchester Arena attack in particular, the business community and counter-terrorism policing recognised that we needed to work closer together. Industry employs thousands of security personnel that can be the extra eyes and ears for the police, so it is a partnership that we are keen to develop. To amplify this point, on Oxford Street in London, our primary tourist location for shopping, there are probably less than 10 police officers patrolling that space. But actually there are over 1,000 security guards on that street. If we can raise the security awareness of all these personnel nationally, then unquestionably we will improve the protection of the public and create a hostile environment for those intent on committing terrorism. I was really delighted when one of the UK's biggest brands, retailer Marks and Spencer's, came forward to invite us into a collaboration that has produced a security training video for their staff that has now been shared free of charge with many other big companies across the UK. Policing alone could not have done this so successfully, and this helps us to work towards common standards. We have developed the principle of dare to share in this area too, giving more detailed information and guidance to a national independent business advisory group which we have developed. This is made up of senior private sector leaders and allows industry to make informed decisions about security, share their challenges and make suggestions to us and government for improvement. We have also launched a collaborative step change programme with business leads, which focuses on 5 key areas, which are transport, tourism, finance and cyber, security and resilience, and crowded places. We have also undertaken a significant number of awareness campaigns aimed at the general public, encouraging everyone to become a counter-terrorism citizen. We needed to provide everyone in the UK with the knowledge that they need to spot suspicious activity or change in behaviours and give them the confidence to report it. A new public campaign called ACT, Action Counters Terrorism, was launched by us last year. ACT for Youth and ACT for Sport are examples of specific campaigns. We utilise credible celebrity voices like TV adventurer Bear Grylls and former England football captain Alan Shearer to reinforce vigilance messages for young people and sports fans. Alongside this, we developed an education package for delivery in the classroom, which has been taken up by our secondary schools. Again, new territory for us, but the support has been really encouraging. These campaigns reached an audience of over tens of millions and helped us to double the number of actionable intelligence reports we received from the public. And of course, of crucial importance, we must continue to call on the public to help us to stop being drawn into terrorism in the first place. It is those most intimately connected to the individuals who become vulnerable to radicalisation who can help us intervene. It is family members, friends and work colleagues who will spot the telltale signs of changes in a person's behaviour. Our government-led multi-agency PREVENT programme has had many successes in steering at-risk individuals away from extremism and serious criminal activity, but we have to acknowledge that it is not understood well enough in many communities, and this has led to the spread of misinformation, which has in turn undermined trust. Challenging the rationale of those who are on a path to terrorism needs to be done at an early stage, as we have heard today, if we are to safeguard that individual and prevent them from crossing the line into criminal and terrorist activity. To do this, those closest to them have to have the confidence to engage in our PREVENT programme. So to conclude, the conference this year was asked to consider the art of countering terrorism. Like most great artists, we in the policing and security community constantly strive to do better, and our experiences in the UK last summer of horrific murders of members of the public, as well as one of my own colleagues who was murdered whilst on duty outside our Parliament building, has in my view brought an even greater connection and passion across the intelligence community, local communities and the private sector to protect us all from terrorism. We have daily reminders across the world of the pain and suffering caused by attacks, and for those who survive, the physical and psychological scars are deep and lifelong. We can never guarantee that we will stop all attacks, but in working together, daring to share, we can stop further attacks and save more lives by creating a hostile environment for those who would do us harm. When it comes to the arts, my love is for music. So perhaps I can end by likening the work of counter-terrorism policing over the past 18 months to being the conductor of a very large orchestra made up of colleagues, public sector partners, business leaders and members of the public of all ages and backgrounds. A conductor who is striving to get us all playing together in tune and in harmony. Thank you.